Okay, whatever you want.
Good morning. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Today we're going to talk about peasants and money. How to access money to invest in their own farm the way they decide, the way they want, without creating indebtedness. This is a tricky thing because the idea here is to be able to use money or finance or investment step by step to create more autonomy and not dependency. Yeah, it sounds a little bit different than the way it goes usually. So here we are. How does our planet look like? If we look at the 1.4 billion people in extreme poverty in the planet, we see that the majority are in the agriculture sector, in the rural areas, and depend one way or the other on agriculture. If we realize that peasants and small farmers are feeding more than 70% of humankind, means all of us, if we consider that 90% of the farms of the world are small farms, and that 85% of the food is consumed locally in the ecoregion, what is called the 100-mile, then we realize that practically we're talking here about a third, almost a half humankind. So logically, they should be the ones better off. I mean the farmers, the peasants, those who make our food and create the landscapes that we like so much. And is it the case? It is not, obviously. It is more the people who created the world financial crisis that are better off, I mean financially. So what is society doing for those who feed us and for those who work the land and closest to nature? There is a sentence I read once which I liked, which was saying humankind has still a lot to learn about the value of nature and the nature of value. So let's think about this. Let's get into that. How do farmers have access to finance to invest in their own farm? We know that farmers are the primary investors in their farms, but how do they access the means to finance that? Let's imagine we take an example. You're a farmer. You want to make a loan, you go to a bank. The first problem is that the bank is far, you need to take public transport, God knows what. Usually it's far from where you live. Secondly, sometimes, quite often, you don't speak the same language. And people look sort of different in the bank. Then you explain, let's say you get through that and you get all these papers to understand or read or sign, and that's another level of complication, another layer, because it seems they have been made in purpose to make sure you don't understand, and actually I can never read the footnotes even with my glasses. Okay, then you have to think of a collateral. What are you prepared to lose? What can you put there? Your land, then the interest rates. So you have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, and where I work, 45%. That's a lot of money. You start feeling a little bit uncomfortable because you're thinking, why should I give this guy or this woman my money? Still, you came all the way from far. You went to get your loan. You're going for it. Okay. Then, let's imagine you get the money, you go back home, you buy what you wanted, you plant, you harvest. For some reason, you don't get what you expected. Harvest failure. You're a farmer, you know perfectly well that this is the cycle. Sometimes they're good years, sometimes they're bad years. This is part of the normal fluctuations of agriculture, because in agriculture there is another dimension of time. You don't go by calendar year. Okay, now we add a layer of complication, and suppose that besides the loan You also entered into some of these schemes, Green Revolution type, or when you have these silver bullet or packages that they tell you, these improved packages, or the outgrower schemes where you get money and you have to plant what we call the Fordization of agriculture, repetitive, boring tasks, far away from the art of farming. These approaches that tie you up and make you produce for the value chains, the famous holy value chains. Okay, so you got these funny guys or women, but they're more guys, to convince you should plant like this, like that, plant this and that, do this and that, and export like this, like that to Starbucks or somewhere else. And you have this Green Revolution type, or high yield, or straitjacket, or top down, with all these obligations to comply. Comply to what? To rules that have been defined somewhere else, and you have very little maneuver on that. Okay, you're stuck because you have your loan, you don't have a harvest, you have followed all sorts of steps and obligations that you have not designed yourself. You're stuck. The cycle, the eternal cycle of coevolution with nature stops there. And you lose it all. You cannot start again next year. So if we take an example, in India, after the Green Revolution, following the indebtedness, there were 200,000 suicides registered by the Ministry of Agriculture. These are the registered ones. There were probably many more. And that actually continues. There are suicides of small farmers because of indebtedness in so many parts of the world. So now we are on the side of the bank, on the other side, and the bank gives a service. They want to be profitable, and for them it's too much transaction cost to have many small loans to many small farmers. It's cumbersome, it's a long process, there's a lot of administrative work behind, so they don't like it either. And this is exactly what we observe in recent years, that the banks are pulling out from lending to small farms or small farmers. And it's become more and more difficult. Even ethical banks are pulling away from supporting or providing money or lending to small farmers. Some years back, they did play a very important role, and banks have had an important role in the development of agriculture in many countries. And in some countries today still there are some very important schemes, like in Brazil, for small farms, but it's rare and it's not general, and it's quite cumbersome. So on one side we have a terrible need of money in peasant economies, and on the other side we have too much money or capital that's floating around. What happened in recent years? The 2008 crisis that cost tens of millions of people their savings, their jobs, their homes. There's a very good video about it that I really strongly recommend. It's called Inside Job. There were massive flows of private capital that were desperately looking for tangible assets. They were trying to escape from these toxic subprimes. And what is more tangible than Mother Earth, the land, the food, the wines? So of course there was a massive movement of capital into land grab. 50 to 80 million hectares were under negotiation with investors in between 2008 and 11. Or the commodities, speculation on commodities, and all these new agriculture funds that started mushrooming around in those years. In a few years, capital reorganized itself. That was the beginning of the new industry, impact investing. And you would have imagined, of course, that 2008 would have been a turning point for governments to put banks, finance, and markets at the service of humankind. But this did not happen. Actually, I don't know why it's called humankind. Well, perhaps you will tell me. The growth in impact investing was led by institutional investors. They started incorporating the ESG, environmental social governance aspects in the sustainability assets. So we had ESG inside and societal values, the $5 to $7 trillion of investments. That was in 2014. We had $70 billion in green bond issuance and $10 to $20 billion into impact funds across the asset classes. That's a huge amount of capital. How much there was dedicated for peasant farming? How much do you guess? Of course, nothing dedicated to peasant farming or agroecology. Why? Because investors are risk averse, they don't like risk, and they don't understand peasant farming, and they have no idea that it can create value at local level and wealth, tremendous, at global level, given the right environment, access to resources, secure access, and the financial means. It could unleash a formidable potential. So the idea emerged to imagine a new investment model dedicated to peasant farming and agroecology, a model with no indebtedness, flexible, and a model that puts peasants on the driver's seat of decision making. So the idea was to bring a new scheme that could allow to shift some of these massive flows of capital into benefiting the local communities. So the work started first with my colleague Axel Narstad from Norway, from the More and Better network. We made a review of what exists already. We looked at what is happening in the international development organizations, in the UN, FAO, World Bank, IFAD, and we looked at a very interesting study made in those years by FAO about all the new agriculture funds that were being created. We also looked at the philanthropy, what was happening during those years, because also in those years there was a boom of people who wanted to do well and change the world, and philanthropy sort of exploded in all directions with some good and some bad. And then there was also a new wave of inclusive investment models that were being developed everywhere. So we did a very global review, and just in a nutshell, what we find is that essentially this is private equity, essentially geared towards agribusiness, very little to the producer. Most of the debt instruments were used for post-production processing, and nothing at all for the small farms. Usually it was outgrower schemes where patterns are designed somewhere else. Farmers have to execute predetermined agendas for markets that are foreign or far away, and an increase of dependency on the external fluctuations. So we started thinking about a new approach, a bridging mechanism between the peasant economies and the source of finance. It could of course be an investor, but it could be a financial institution, or it can be a donor or grant, whatever. But that was to kill two birds with one shot, though I don't like this expression. But it was to use the capital that was being used for plantations or commercial agriculture, to use it for a viable form of agriculture. Where? We started in Mozambique. With who? We started with UNAC, which is a peasant organization representing 18 million peasants in Mozambique. So they're a member of La Via Campesina, you may know them. We started with Reinaldo Shingore, with Luis Muchanga, with Bartolomeo Antonio, and all their teams and the staff. We worked with Michael Shaw from Scotland on all the financial, the business plan, He's very, very good. And we worked with Mikaya, a local NGO, with Andrew Kingman and Milagre Nuvunga, who were also doing amazing work there. So we got the funds to make a research, the initial research from Norfund, which is an organization in Norway depending from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, investing massively in many different countries, especially on energy. But they started investing also a few years back in agriculture, but mainly commercial agriculture. So we wanted to show them that an alternative is possible for the use of these investments. And we were hoping to influence a shift in that direction. So what type of farming? We did a fantastic work with the Millennium Institute. You may know Hans Herren, who was a World Food Prize. And the Millennium Institute developed a software, a system, a model, that was the one, the T21, used by UNEP for the green economy of the world. And this model was used then in different countries to plan for viable, sustainable agriculture for the long term, providing a range of scenarios and showing how everything would behave in the long term. So it's an extremely powerful and sophisticated tool that is being used worldwide. And they were kind enough to agree to apply it for the small little areas where we were going to start working on our pilot projects that UNAC had defined together with the farmers in Mozambique. We tested 3 different possibilities. Low external input in terms of herbicide, pesticides, and all the external inputs in agriculture. So low external input, high external input, and business as usual scenarios. And the modeling was a dynamic forecast for 20 years, and it analyzed socioeconomic factors, so that was capital, infrastructure, plant genetic resources, energy, employment, agriculture knowledge. And then environmental factors with soil nutrients, soil organic matter, biodiversity, pest density, water, land. And the projections were in 4 main areas: average yield, farm surplus, energy use, and population below poverty line. The results were astonishing. We put a lot of data into that and verified it. It was quite a work. And it was significantly better on the long term on the low external input. So that's the type of agriculture that we're talking about. We're talking about agroecology, and this is a focus also on renewable resources. So it's soil and water regeneration, conservation, practices that enhance the ecological natural process, animal traction, small mechanization in some cases, adding diversity in crops, in fruits, in fodder, add also cover crops, green and animal manure, crop rotation, maximizing biological activity, biological control, managing weeds and insects. The agroecology that you know. Designing the model now. We shared with many friends and colleagues our thoughts and what we wanted to develop. And we worked with Jandu van der Plag and came back to the roots and the origin of the credit systems. And we looked at what exists, for example, in Arab countries where they are not allowed to, because of religious principles, to get interest rates and earn money with interest. So we realized that the rationality of formal credit is very different to the rationality of peasant economies and peasant farming, because it implies a collateral and a cash flow. This is not the case in informal credit systems, where repayment is flexible. It is with risk sharing as part of reciprocity relations, and the when and how are flexible and depend on the circumstances. So the solution was to have an in-between mechanism between what we called front door, back door, that mediates between the financial institutions and the peasants on the other side. And that can be an elected committee or the board of a farmer association that plays this role of the in-between. So at the front door, you have the relation with the financial institution and you obtain a grant or a loan. At the back door, you deal with the individual members, the peasants, and the organization here will translate the package of the financial institution in a way that can fit the rationality of the peasant system and the individual peasants. So the rules of the game can be very different in the different two doors. So usually what happens in the informal systems, you have one party that brings land and labor, and the other brings informal credit or inputs. And at the time of harvest, the production is divided. When the harvest is abundant and good, the lender gets a higher remuneration and the farmer a higher income. In case of failure, both suffer a loss. But however, the farmer does not lose the land and he can always start again next year. The losses are compensated by the benefits. In other words, there is a fair return on investment. And this is why many people, when they have money, they engage into this form of lending. And this is informal contracts. They work because there is trust between the two parties. So central to that novel solution was the creation of a common fund. This common fund obtains credit from financial institution. It's administered locally by a committee of leaders who have a relation of trust with the farmers. And between the fund and the farmers there is a negotiated, acceptable form of risk sharing that is applied. The local committee discusses who can get a loan and control the correct application of the contract. And with repayment after harvest, the fund pays back to the financial institution. So we designed a new scheme, a new model to finance agroecology. And the purpose was to test which different modalities of credit allocation or financial allocation, together with the democratic internal process of decision-making mechanism, could lead to greater autonomy, self-determination, and also catalyze the local ecologies and economies. The model is based on individual and collective investments for agroecology, and it is applied within a framework of 12 steps. Let's stop a little bit here because it's important, the individual and collective, because very often these two have been put in opposition. And we had, in the times of cooperatives, imposed collective where everything should be collective, or in some countries in the world where everything is individual and individualistic. And we can see that one can nurture the other and help the other. So when you put individual and collective together, this is much more powerful. So the pilot, if you want to put it in the terminology of investors, because if we are working with investors, they need to understand, the pilot tests the functioning of royalty on revenue, which means a percentage of the sales, and risk-sharing mechanisms. And in investor terms, it is inclusive investment as a shared risk model involving negotiated shared participation in profits from produce sales between farmers and investors without resorting to loans or collaterals. So the business model is better sales, increasing farm revenues and profitability. The potential investors share in the profits at an agreed percentage of the farmers' organization profit. The other part of the profit is held by the farmers in a revolving fund that can be reinvested in farming. So, of course, if it is not an investor, you can have a public fund or a donor, and it's even better because the revolving fund will increase faster. But at least you don't have this condescending aid okay, and you can move forward and go ahead on equal terms in every case, and you can escape from this development mindset, which really needs to change. The framework now, the 12 steps, transition steps. We wrote a book a few years back of these 12 steps because we made a review of some of the world successes, agriculture transitions in the world. And what we could see is that every time there were these steps coming back again and again. So what are these steps? They're not incremental, they're not in order, they follow a reiterative process. And if we want to understand these, the framework that we can imagine or visualize is a painting for which only the frame is being built and for which the painting itself is left blank for the local communities themselves to do the painting and mix the colors as they wish. So the surrounding frame instead is carefully designed with clear roles and responsibilities for the different players involved. In other words, the framing that surrounds this center of open possibilities will contain the values, principles, conditions that allow the emergence of endogenous development, or development from within, until it becomes self-propelling. So really, in a nutshell, and if you want more detail, it's in the book. There is, number one, the local consultation, because often the communities, or there will be an initial conversation, the train. When there is a problem from the outside or something that creates some movement or disturbance in the community, people will sit and discuss it. So that's the initial first step, that something has triggered people coming around a subject or a theme together. Then the mapping of local resources. There is a beautiful work done by the Gaia Foundation on that in Kenya. That's looking with the elders of the traditions, the past, how the place looked like, and projecting for the future what the community would like for the place to look like. That's a very strong bonding exercise. Then the third step is exploration of new practices and tools that can be used to transform the reality there. And the democratic consultation now with the members outside the community, because you can start some coalitions. At that point, there is the repatterning of resources and how to create more value. How to transfer, because this is when you have a transformation of the landscapes and the relationships. You realize that by changing the connections with things that existed already, but they were just not connected on that way, you can transform many things. And the definition of shared values, which again consolidates the bond. Now the negotiation to strengthen access to resources. So this is when we are with economical and other actors outside, and that's the moment to reclaim autonomy or rights on resources. And the creation of new links in different fields like the markets, the clients. You can be artisanal, craftsmanship, activities, leisure. Then you see the birth, some places sometimes, of a transition sort of platform that is now more formal and open access to certain tools. There are some very interesting social innovations, and one is l'atelier paysan, about tools and instruments and mechanization that is open source, and you can transform at home or on the farm. And now permeability and synergies. What is happening? What are the similar experiences in other places? How can we exchange, share, and explore together? Then the next step, 11, is expansion, emergence of replication. And this is when the qualitative shift occurs, because this is when it goes to scale. and then you have a distribution of wealth, value is created, it's not captured by outside levels of aggregation, and it can be reinvested in the community. So when we start a pilot, we offer a range of modalities to choose upon, because very often if you propose to give a certain amount of capital and say, okay, you can do individual or collective investments, the first reaction will be to do like the bank would do, means you have a certain fixed amount and an interest rate. So we offer different modalities, and farmers can choose upon, but they can also invent their own. The first modality, for example, let's imagine you receive 15,000 euros. You can decide that you want to have individual loans or give individual people a certain amount to finance their own farm. And the board will decide the maximum amount for these individual loans, and after harvest within a year, it will be paid back with an interest rate that can be agreed, let's say for example 10%. And in addition, the peasants will pay a premium that will go and feed the revolving fund. Second, collective investment. If we can consider that farmers have what they need from family or friends for their own individual investments, but they need investment on collective, like for example irrigation or borehole, which is what the organization is doing now in Mozambique, or market field points, or funding the transition to agroecology. It can be conservation structures, anything. So the loan is used, the train, for collective services. The user pay a fee to the revolving fund, and the initial loan then is repaid from this fund. And it can also pay other services for peasants. The third one, which we call resilience, which is individual and collective, you have the initial fund, 15,000, and let's imagine now that the board decides that 5,000 is for individual loans, 5,000 is for collective investments, 5,000 is a buffer as a reserve. The loan is repaid as a fixed percentage of the sales, let's say 30% or 40%, which means that there is a risk sharing mechanism. And the benefit goes to the local fund and allows to enlarge autonomy and resilience. So even if in case of bad harvest, there's always a reserve there. What is the advantage for peasants? They have access, for example, to a field market point or collective selling. They have access to finance. They receive good quality material or planting material, whatever they require. There is also, they benefit from a solidarity mechanism, and they help to enlarge the fund to strengthen their position. Let's take an example. A farmer takes a loan of 100 euros. He or she sells the production for 1,000. After harvest, he or she will pay the fund 30%, 300 euros, and he or she got 700 as a remuneration for the work. After paying back the 100 initial euros, 200 are there to enlarge the fund. What is important here to understand is that the royalty on revenue or the risk sharing doesn't go away. It serves to feed the fund, the common fund that stays within the community. So starting a pilot, you first select a peasant organization, or this is done in consultation, of course, with the farmer organizations. Present the model, discuss, adjust, a series of feedback loops. Then there are all the internal deliberations, agreements, establishment and validation of the different committees, implementation committee, gender parity, that's a part of the scheme, a list of peasants that participate, writing a peasant chart of common values, signature of the contractual agreement between the financial institution and the peasant organization, the design of the agroecology farming system with upstream and downstream, with input and services, decision on individual and collective investment, signature of the contracts by the farmers themselves, and establishment of a dedicated bank account, transfer of funds, and a financial analyst that follows step by step. So this is now happening. We have this pilot project which I mentioned before in Mozambique with 30 farmers, and the association called Alfredo Namitete with a great agroecology coordinator, Mohamed Obulialia from Kenya. And he coordinates together with Reinaldo Shingore from UNAC and the other staff from UNAC and the different committees. So this is the type of contract that they sign. You can see here that their decision was that part of the individual loans would be 10,000 metical for a year with 10% interest, and then there would be collective investments with 30% on the sales. So the pilot result will be used to fine-tune the model together and get proof of concept to be able to replicate and hopefully hit impact and scale. So in place we have now an association internal committee that follows up directly with the farmers on the field what is happening. In the case of Alfredo Namitete, the president is a woman, the vice president is a woman, and the majority of the farmers are women. Then we have an implementation committee. So what does this one do? It helps design, approve, implement the investment plans. It undertakes all the procurement of goods and services and deliver on fixed dates to the farmers. It oversees the works and the construction. For example, in this case, they decided to make a borehole as per specifications, and there is also a legislation. It has to be registered legally, so there is some administrative steps there. The local NGO, Mikaya, that provides support, guidance, monitoring locally. And then CORE. CORE is where I work. Is the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience in Coventry University in the UK, headed by Michel Pimbert. And CORE provides all the scientific backup and expertise with scientists and their networks in the different fields of agroecology. CORE also, by the way, has a master in agroecology, which is great. Now, we hope to be able to expand now with a grant from the Nordic Climate Facility to expand to 20 pilots in Mozambique. And we work closely with Karsten Gifle from Norgesvel in Norway. So we are really developing synergies there. The benefits of this type of pilot and model: access to finance, we said it, increased autonomy of the local communities, peasants on the driver's seat of decision making, stronger local institutions, democratic consultative process, transitioning towards healthier food also, because you increase diversity and quality, higher levels of aggregation involving individual and collective selling, and holistic and integrated upstream and downstream investments. So yes, rather than working by silos, like it has been the case in many development projects in the past, where you have irrigation or post-harvest losses or technical support or crop by crop. Here you have a much more holistic approach. Okay, what is the difference with other models? The difference is that first it unlocks a very major bottleneck for farmers, which is access to finance. Then it allows to intensify production, agroecology production. And it's ecological intensification. Then it helps to build the farm for the long term. We're not talking about short term, like in commercial agriculture, where you get as much as you can from the soil and then you leave it a desert. Here you're planning for the very long term. It focuses on agroecology, doesn't create indebtedness or dependency. It activates internal social processes of control, trust, solidarity. It allows to reinvest the flow of value created locally, circular flows, and also the local craftsmanships, the SMEs, the small businesses that can flourish around. It allows flexibility and choice and takes into account the local culture, the tradition, Perhaps you want to choose this variety of rice or that one because it corresponds to your recipes. It regenerates the soils, it's good for the climate. It allows carbon sequestration, crop adaptation, and opens up the possibility for living systems and ecological processes to evolve. So the impact again will be around the same lines, means abundant and healthy foods for local communities, production of quality products for national and also, if need be, international markets, the possibility to have strong local institutions and social dynamics, provide diverse forms of local employment also, particularly around the selling, collective selling, processing, businesses and craftsmanship. It's also a way to increase the diversity of living beings, crops and animals alike. It can be domesticated, it can be wild, as peasants co-evolve with nature. And then you have also the in situ conservation of genetic resources and wild relatives. The creation of rich and live soils that become a carbon sink, and it's important for climate mitigation. And bringing back dynamic rural territories, the countryside, for new spaces of invention and creativity with tangible and intangible value, and the creation of wealth for the nation as a whole. So if you would like to join and start a pilot, you're very much welcome, and we will be very happy to contribute in any way we can. So you can start a pilot anyway, or in any place. We have started with 15,000 euros, so it's not much, but you can start. And Margaret Whitley, she used to say that change happens when separate local efforts connect with each other as networks. They become a community of practice, and suddenly, surprisingly, a new system emerges at a greater scale. And I like this sentence: emergence is how life creates radical change and takes things to scale. So the important thing is not to convince, but to connect. Through these new relationships, to develop new knowledge, practice, and commitment. So thank you, Milton, and those who are organizing this forum. Thank you for connecting us. Now, before saying goodbye, I would like to add very briefly that during this journey into the world of finance and investments, which was particular for me because it was not my world at all, I discovered many initiatives that are amazing, which I would like to share with you. And it's people who look at value, money, and economy in a very, very different way. And I believe this is what will be the economy of the future. So in the UK there is an initiative that's called Positive Money, that is very interesting, trying to put finance back in the hands of governments, but with overseen by citizens, let me say it this way. Then there is another called Pool of Money in New Zealand, inspired from experiences in Switzerland, where people put the money together. They absolutely have nothing to do with banks, so there are no interest rates or anything, but they buy what they want with the same type of trust and in relationships. The others, of course, is the currencies, the local currencies that you probably know. In Brazil there's Banco Palmas. There is the Weir Bank in Switzerland. That's the world's most successful non-state currency system, with a turnover of 1.6 billion Weir, which is equivalent to 1.6 billion US dollars. And these are initiatives with many others, the Brixton Pound, the Talente, the Equal Dollar, the Sol Violet, Itaca, etc. It's like multiple local currencies to start getting away from the very dangerous and obsolete monetary system in which we are stuck today. And I also discovered Bernard Lietard. He played an important role when the euro was created. And he tried for years to create a new neutral single currency away from these toxic currencies of today. So in this video that I give you the link, he talks about a future that's coming. Probably we won't have any more currencies or money. But in the meantime, to prepare for that, we can have an ecology of currencies. So let's get to that. And let's also have an ecology of beings who are connected and in relationships, in dignity and pride. And I would finish with these words from a very dear friend of mine. He says, Awile lata, in one little place in the world, which means, it is short for Awile lata achinach faich. I'm not ensuring that's the right pronunciation, I will ask him. And it means every day that I see you, and every day I don't see you. And which means, may you be with me every day I see, and every day I don't see you. So, may you all be with me, and I will be with you. And he says, Ben Ashleaves, which means a blessing be with you. Thank you very much.
Bianach lacht, Bianach lacht, Bianach luiv, Bianach luiv, a hula la, a chis na chaich, a hula la, a chis na chaich.